The ancient Huns was such a big deal that I actually know jokes about them in 2 different languages. When I was younger, I used to run around the Netherlands asking people, waar wonen de Hunnen? And the answer was, of course, in Hunland. That's hilarious if you're Dutch, by the way. But the Huns are a pretty big deal. They burst onto the scene, they trashed things in the Roman Empire, and they were led, of course, by their famous and brutal leader, Attila. But when it comes to the language that they spoke, we really have no idea what it was related to, what it sounded like. And I mean, we really have no idea. We have no surviving Hunnic texts. We have no inscriptions in any alphabet that we think is Hunnic. And we even don't have any place names in Hunnic either that we can go off, because we don't really know where they came from. So just how can you work out what kind of language they were speaking when there's that little information to go on? It makes them even more mysterious than perhaps they already were. Okay, let's start in the beginning. Well, one way we can look at the Huns is, of course, to look at what other people said about the Huns. And kind of like the Vikings, these were often people that didn't really like the Huns because they were often at the other end of their arrows. These are largely the Romans and literate cultures that they encountered, and possibly some Chinese ones as well, but we'll get onto that a little bit later. Now, of course, the very famous Hun is Attila. But what's interesting is that even the name Attila isn't Hunnic. It's not even in the Hunnic language. The name Attila is quite interesting, and we do actually know what it means, but it hasn't come from the Hunnic language. Instead, it seems to have come from the Gothic language. Now, Goths are obviously people who dress in black, but in this context, they were a Germanic tribe that were Bezimaras, as they say in Sunderland, with the Huns. Now, the word Attila can be broken up into 2 parts. Atta in Gothic meant father, and illa at the end of words was a diminutive, which means a shortening, like adding ito or ita in Spanish. So Attila simply meant little father. Now, what's cool here for my Frisian viewers is that in pretty much every other Germanic language, that atta has been replaced by the kind of father, vater, vader word. But in the Frisian languages, we still have this as in West Frisian, heit, and in the North Frisian languages, similar forms that have survived from this root word that in the Germanic Gothic language gave us atta and the name Attila as. So the Goths are pretty interesting. Of course, they were a Germanic tribe that split off from the other Germanic tribes up in the north of Europe and went on this very long journey southwards to the shores of the Black Sea, and there joined with the Huns and attacked the Roman Empire. Now, Priscus, who is a Roman author, tells us a little bit about the Huns and the Goths working together, and he says that there was both Hunnic spoken in the army camp of the Huns of Attila, and that there was Gothic spoken at the same time. So a multilingual environment, which might be why Attila's name is actually a Gothic name rather than a Hunnic name. But what about the other names that we have? Well, apart from Attila, we also have Rugila. Now we can see the illa ending again looks Germanic, and the rug seems to be Turkic. Bleda, another name of I believe a Hunnic prince, is also Germanic. Elak is Turkic, as is Dengizich and Ernak. They all appear to be Turkic. The name of Attila's father, Munzuk, appears even to be from the Proto-Turkic word bunchuk, which means war flag. Now, Turkic, it's important to explain here, is the name of a language family that originated in Central Asia and has many different related languages that are spread around, some as far north as Siberia, and of course, most famously, and what we think of today, and many people, will be Turkish. Now, in a similar way that German and Germanic are not exactly the same, Germanic is the language family, Turkic is the name of the language family, and German is the name of the language. 40% of all Turkic speakers speak Turkish, so the language of Turkey, but that means 60% speak a different language, a different Turkic language. Now, around AD 540, so after Attila's time, we learn of another Hunnic general who is called something like Apsich, And this seems to be derived from a different language that is called Ossetic, a word that seems to be related to horse, mare in this case, so a female horse. And Ascetic is the language that we associate with another nomadic group that came in from the east and invaded parts of Europe called the Alans. Now the Alans, again, we find them over in Central Europe that they settled, and so perhaps then we also should number Alans among the Huns, and the Ossetic language may also be a clue as to what the Hunnic language was like. Now, based on all the Hunnic names that survive, there's around 30 that we have, there are many different influences that we can see: Germanic, Turkic, Ossetic, and some others too. And this analysis looked at all of these names and tried to figure out what the Hunnic language was. This is the conclusion. Our detailed analysis of the Hunnic onomastic material, together with examination of it from the point of view of Altaistic linguistics, has yielded very positive results indeed. It has proved that it is possible to determine the character of the Hunnic language. It was not a Turkic language, but one between Turkic and Mongolian, probably closer to the former than the latter. The language had strong ties to Old Bulgarian and to modern Chuvash, but also had some important connections, especially lexical and morphological, to Ottoman and Yakut. So this is from the Hunnic language of the Attila clan by Omelian Pritsak from 1982, who spent a long time looking at the mystery of the Hunnic language. This study again is just based on those names. Now there is another way we can look at the Hunnic language which isn't based on names, because of course many people give names that don't come from their own language or their own culture. Just think about how many people have Hebrew names like Hannah, or names derived from Latin like Lucas, or even names that have gone through another language such as James, which is actually the Irish form of Jacobus, which is a Latin form. So it's not a surefire way of figuring out what their actual spoken language was, because names are so easily adopted across cultures and languages. Now, there is one text which is very interesting when it comes to the Hunnic language, and 3 different words have been identified within this text that are often said to be Hunnic. These 3 words are medos, which appears to be an alcoholic drink, kamos, which again appears to be a different kind of drink, and another word which may be some kind of dirge or lamentation or song. And the 3 words are medos, kamos, and strava. So the first word, medos, seems to be very Indo-European, as in maybe Proto-Germanic from medus, or perhaps Proto-Balto-Slavic, the ancestor of the Baltic and Slavic languages. And this word comes from a root from honey and probably means like a honey drink. Mead is the modern English equivalent. This seems to fit really well. It looks Germanic with that final s sound. As we can see, Proto-Germanic would be medus. So almost certainly this is Germanic and not something Hunnic. The second word, again, kamos, seems to come not from Germanic but rather from Latin kamum, or perhaps most likely in the form that we see here from Greek kamos. The area that the Huns and the Goths went through, a lot of them were Greek-speaking areas, so it's very likely that they picked up Greek words as well. So this again doesn't seem to be Hunnic. And finally, strava doesn't appear to be Turkic, at least because you can't get a consonant cluster at the start of words in the Turkic language at this time, and so this again seems to be much more likely a Proto-Balto-Slavic word. Of course, Slavic speakers or Proto-Balto-Slavic speakers were also very much in the area that they were crossing through, so it's no surprise that they potentially would have borrowed some of these words. That does mean that none of these words actually seem to be Hunnic. Another word that's sometimes claimed to be Hunnic is the word quiver. Now this is quite an interesting one. The modern English word, I believe, has been borrowed from French later down the line, but in Old English the word survives as koker, which is then reconstructed in a Proto-West Germanic form based on other related languages like German and Dutch and others to kokar. And it's sometimes said that this may be a borrowing from Hunnic, because we can't find any word that this would have come from in Germanic. However, not everyone agreed with the argument behind this, not so much on a kind of linguistic level, but rather from the other side, that this should be seen as Hunnic. In particular, the scholar Otto Helfen in the World of the Huns argued that based on, which I think is just a really cool thing to add at the end of his argument here, that he had actually seen them carrying bows and quivers full of arrows at ceremonial shooting contests, which means that they can't possibly have lost the word for quiver because they didn't use them, which was part of the argument that had been put forward by Hubschmidt earlier to argue that this word must have come from the Huns and not from these Turkish people. So his conclusion was that while this word koker may come from steppe peoples, which is already really cool, it's probably of Altaic origin, from the Avars, another one of these nomadic peoples, rather than from the Huns, if that is indeed where it has come from. Very frustratingly, around AD 554, we know that a missionary from the Byzantines, Quardusht, went to the Huns to preach and translated the Bible into Hunnic. But we don't have the Bible in Hunnic. It is lost to us. Almost certainly it's been destroyed down the ages. Maybe it still exists somewhere. That would be an absolutely incredible find. If someone finds the Bible, this old stuffy manuscript, probably copied once or twice, and it's in a language that no one knows what it is, then maybe that would be Quardusht's Hunnic Bible. That would be incredible. However, very, very slim chance that that will ever see the light of day. Almost certainly it has been destroyed, and that would be a huge breakthrough when it came to the Hunnic language if we could access that. So really, there's not a lot that we can say about the Hunnic language for sure, even by looking at what others have said about the Huns. Now, more recently, there's been this idea that the Huns should be related to or are the same people as the European name for a nomadic group of people called the Xiōng-nú, who lived somewhere in, I suppose, what today is northern China, southern Russia, in this large steppe, and they appear in various Chinese sources before their confederacy was destroyed. Now, observations about the peoples here are that rather than being a very solid kind of ethnic linguistic entity, almost certainly they would have been in close contact with Turkic speaking people for a long time, probably allying with different groups, different tribes, different kingdoms and polities, and that it's very probable that Turkic speaking people joined in on their campaigns, and that maybe also explains why we find a lot of Turkic names among Hunnic names, even if the Hunnic language itself may not have been Turkic. So that's a slightly different explanation about this very mixed group that we see among the Huns and their names. And this is indeed something very common that you see with various nomadic groups, that various languages can exist and various smaller identities exist in these confederations as they go. And it again says something about the Huns when they came into Europe, how the Goths were also able to become part of their army, to join in their camp and continue their language, and maybe even that was why Attila was given a Germanic name that has survived, that this was part of this agreement between different groups, that they were readily adopting names from other people from different language groups who became part of this confederation. That's one possibility. Very recently, so last year from making this video, 2025, there was a new piece of research that was done that maybe has pinpointed very accurately the language of the Huns in Asia. This study looked at various prehistoric river names and went from this idea that the Xiōng-nú were actually the name of the Huns when they were in Asia before they came to Europe. Their conclusion is as follows. It therefore seems an inevitable conclusion to us that Huns and Xiōng-nú both spoke the same early form of Aryan that we have tentatively termed Old Aryan here, and that consequently the linguistic and thus most probably also the ethnic core of the Huns derived from the Xiōng-nú. These findings corroborate recent archaeological and genetic findings and show that the application of the methodology sketched out here can lead to substantial insights into the linguistic history even of regions such as Inner Asia that are at present under-researched and the history of which is much less perfectly understood than that of many other parts of the world such as Central Europe or the Mediterranean. Now, the article I'll link below is called Linguistic Evidence Suggests that Xiōng-nú and Huns spoke the same Paleo-Siberian language. So this is really addressing the same question as this video. Really do recommend that you check that out. Now, if they're right, the Huns will have spoken Arin. Now, Arin stands for the American Registry Internet Name. Hold on, that's the wrong one. Arin, or Old Arin, is part of the Yenisei language family, which is spoken in around Lake Baikal in Russia. Now, there were various languages in this language group that were spoken in this area, but now the only one that remains is called Ket. Now, that's in a slightly different branch, but it's still related to the Arin group, which died out in history already. Now, as of 2024, there were just 30 speakers of Ket still alive, almost all of them elderly. Yuh, which was the penultimate language in this language group in the Yenisei language family, died out in 1974, and as you can see, all the other groups have also gone extinct. Ket is the final of this language group that the Huns have been identified with, the Yenisei language family. It's estimated that by the start of the 22nd century, between half and 90% of all languages currently spoken on Earth will have gone extinct. And it seems like this may also be the way that this language that is connected to the language of the Huns will go, which is kind of sad, really, because languages, I absolutely love them. I think they're an integral part of culture, of life as a human living through language, sense of meaning and identity, connecting with one's history. And indeed, it's super useful to have these connections because, as with Attila, we can find things out like the name Attila through living languages, like the Frisian languages, which still retain this root word from atta, from which we know that it means father in Gothic. Even though Gothic itself has gone extinct already in the Middle Ages, the Frisian languages continue this tradition. So here's a bit of a curveball at the end, but this is where my looking into the language of the Huns has led, and I would sort of urge people to go away with this. And if you've been thinking about learning a smaller language, a minoritized language, especially if it's one within your own community, if there are elderly people who still speak it and you've kind of thought about it, this is your cue. Go and do it. You can be the change that you want to see. It's what Attila would have wanted. Anyway, thank you so much for watching this video. I hope this has been somewhat interesting. I like going down this rabbit hole when I found out about that maybe quiver is a Hunnic loanword. Then I was like, oh, what actually is the Hunnic language? And then I found, well, we don't know. So that's sort of the TLDR. If you're interested in this kind of thing and you're new, feel free to subscribe. And otherwise, I'll see you in the next video.